our next panel, which has many fantastic speakers. And it will be all about how and why financial technology is emerging as a core disruptor of of today's financial system. So there is a clear recognition worldwide that regulation is needed to ensure long-term and sustainable growth. But what are regulators' role to promote sustainable fintech solutions? I'm super pleased to welcome, except for Jesper, who's of course welcome again, Simon Zadek, previous UN Digital Financing Task Force, Damien, Executive Director and Deputy Chief Fintech Officer, MAS, and I would like to hand over to Dea Markova.
So the topic we have today is how regulation could drive sustainable adoption of fintech solutions, and it's an interesting way to pose the question because regulation is not always positioned as a driver of innovation, although I think the gentleman on my panel might disagree with that characterization. I also hope that you have had a chance or will have a chance to look at the content from both the Denmark channel and the other channels of SFF today, because I've been really impressed with how many tangible examples of how fintech solutions are moving the needle on sustainable development there have been, as well as a lot of interesting scientific facts on how urgent that change is. But to hand over to my panelists, we heard kind of the strategy and the view from Denmark, and I wanted to give the first opportunity to Damien, who's the Deputy Chief Fintech Officer of the MAS in Singapore, to share with us what his priorities and the MAS's approach and priorities to sustainable development are. So Damien, over to you.
Yep, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I realized that my letter is just send a signal with regards to updating Adobe Flash at the right moment. Welcome to the new world of technology. So yeah, Dea, thanks for that. And it was a very good set of sharing by Jesper earlier. In fact, quite a fair bit of the things that that Jesper just mentioned earlier, I think it resonates well with what we have been doing and are looking at doing at the MAS and in Singapore as well. So, and in fact, if we have gone through, some of you may have gone through the earlier sessions in the Impact Summit of the Singapore Fintech Festival, you would have seen that the urgencies of why we need to all come together to deal with this particular crisis of our generation. So when we talk about, for instance, the part of the temperature rise of up to 1.5 degrees Celsius, for instance, I think we also have to take into considerations that temperature rise means different things to different people in different parts of the world. We have looked at, for example, the Himalayas. They have been talking about at high altitudes, when a 1.5 degrees Celsius change at the ground level means it's more than 2 degrees for them. And the implications for them is very different. So all of us has different parts to play. And then within Singapore itself, we are highly committed to making sure that we contribute and do our part with regards to the various opportunities and angles at which MAS as a regulator can bring about. And there are a few angles. So when I look at, as a regulator, there are roles with regards to how we supervise, for instance, our financial institutions in terms of how they are managing environmental risks. And in Singapore itself, that becomes an important angle for us because, as Jesper noted earlier, in terms of the physical as well as the transition risks, I think we want to make sure that the financial industry is prepared for them and there's orderly moves in terms of how they are managing these risks, in terms of environmental risks. So the part towards the angle itself, in fact, this week we have just issued a set of guidelines that applies across the broad spectrum of financial services areas covering banks, insurers, and asset managers. So this set of guidelines outlines our expectations in terms of how financial institutions should be managing the risk in environmental risk as part of their enterprise risk management, which financial institutions have always been doing that. But there is a necessary part of environmental risk focus that now needs to be plugged in as part of their enterprise risk management. And those are the different areas around things like credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, reputational risk, all the various different angles and the roles and responsibilities that all these different parts of the financial institutions will need to pay attention to as within this whole environmental risk management. So I think that's one angle at which, as an example, and we will, with this issuance of these guidelines, want our financial institutions to pay focused attention to it in the upcoming year itself, and of course in upcoming stress tests following from that will be something that we will look into. Now, that's from a supervisory and regulatory perspective of things. But as a regulator, there's also another angle that we have been looking at, which is our convening powers, our ability to bring together the different stakeholders within the industry itself, be it from the financial institutions to solution providers, technology solution providers. How are we able to bring them together and to work together? And this is the convening power of a regulator as well as a developer that the MES plays a part in Singapore itself. And one of these angles and one of these opportunities that we look at is our ability to support such efforts as these different parties in the industry come together. One angle was the areas of defraying costs in terms of some of these cooperation efforts that technology solution providers and financial institutions are coming together. So in fact, we have also recently announced that we are setting aside a significant proportion of our financial sector technology and innovation grant scheme itself, which we have set aside $185 million US dollars for the next 3 years, 2020 to 2022, 2022. But out of which 20% has been earmarked to make sure that it's targeted at the green areas. So we want to support the effort with regards to the different angles, be it in terms of proof of concepts, be it in terms of developing of industry platforms, better sharing of information, for instance. So these are the things as another angle at which, as a regulator, as a developer of the financial sector itself, we see our part in being able to come in, play a role, and making sure that the industry is able to move along in the way in which we have a more orderly move by the industry towards better environmental risk management. So I'll take a pause here, but that's what we are looking at in the upcoming few years.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks, Damien. I'd like to pass the ball back to Jesper, actually, because we heard about your 5 years broader financial services strategy and your views on green finance. But what can the fintech sector expect from the DFSA next year in terms of promotion and supporting their efforts in sustainable development?
Thanks a lot. In relation to the area of fintech narrowly defined already in our previous 5-year plan, we had in our strategy as one of our key areas the support of the fintech industry, and that resulted in the establishment of a specific division with specific tasks in order to help the fintech industry on. We have yet to decide on the broader implications of our focus on the ESG area. We are still in a process where secondary legislation is being written at the European level and standards are being set in terms of how far we should go. But I have little doubt that this will be one of the areas where our new strategy will, in terms of how successful we are, will be assessed on this issue. I think that there's a lot of scope out there, as I said, to combine the innovativeness of fintech with the requirements in relation to living up to new standards in terms of sustainability. There's the whole issue, which I think will be important, of who is going to verify whether certain products live up to sustainability standards, where I think we will need the help of outsiders as a supervisor, because we have a lot of different forms of capacity, but our strength in assessing CO2 emissions should probably not be put on too high a pedestal. So I think there's a whole market out there in terms of doing these sort of things where the fintech industry could definitely contribute, and where we'll be happy to work with them in terms of moving these contributions forward.
Thanks, Jesper. And let's say, a year from today, maybe we kind of follow back on those aspirations and see how you've done. I wanted to pass on to our third panelist, Simon. Have you had a chance to join? I think maybe we'll give Simon a little bit more time to get with us. And also, Jesper, can I ask if you don't mind turn your camera on? I think maybe the audience would prefer that. Okay, so I'll move on to or keep the conversation on the dancing bridge, as you guys put it, the Denmark Singapore relationship a few years back.
Do I have my camera on now, or do I not?
You do, yes. Yeah, you have it. We can see you. Yeah.
It's dark here.
So,
dark and windy, by the way.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the only person on this call who can't empathize is Damien. So
yeah, we envy him. There's a lot of similarities between Denmark and Singapore, but climate is definitely not one of them.
Wow, that's a good segue into my question, because I was going to say there's a lot of similarities between Singapore and Denmark, because your impact on climate and sustainability in the region, or your kind of your role, your leadership in both sustainability and innovation goes above the size of your respective countries. So I was really interested in your views on what you think. I mean, Jesper, you mentioned, yes, there is a European Green Deal, which is being negotiated at an EU level, but what do you think your roles of your countries are looking at your broader regions, ASEAN and EU respectively? So I'll start the question with Damien.
Sorry, me? Yeah. Okay. So when I look at the first and foremost, we've got to recognize that the climate issue is one that is global in nature, and so it affects everyone, and therefore the role that everyone needs to play is also one that we must all recognize that we have a responsibility to, in a sense. In our little bits and ways that we got to make sure that we are able to play in meaningful ways, meaningful roles, meaningful convening abilities to bring together the collective effort, in a sense, in terms of all the various changes that we all have to make. So be it in Asia or be it with Europe itself, I think that there are many opportunities that for corporations. If I take the example of the carbon market, for instance. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the carbon market itself, right now the carbon market itself is it's first and foremost, we recognize that carbon credits itself is an important opportunity and important means at which firms are using as part of their decarbonization efforts. And in a certain way, it also helps to bring about the collective efforts of the rest in terms of where they contribute towards all these various creation carbon credits. But if you look at the carbon credit market itself, it is highly fragmented with very little liquidity. And in that sense, that it creates a kind of a lot of inefficiencies and or breakages in opportunities to be able to tap on this means as a way of helping towards the greater cause of climate change control. And therefore, I think if you look at the different regions, if there's opportunities to be able to come together and bring about put in place the necessary infrastructure, the appropriate data flows itself, and creating a more efficient carbon credit market itself, then I think it is about getting a right price on the carbon credits, getting a right opportunities for such carbon credits to be an effective tool for the purposes of helping the broader industries wherever they are, in terms of their decarbonization efforts as a whole. So I think these are examples of things that we all have to come together as a collective to be able to do so. Individual jurisdictions, individual countries will not be able to do or amount to significant effort. But the only way in which we can do this is we all come together in some of these efforts. Yeah. Maybe I'll take a pause here and hear from Jesper as well. We probably have a lot of you.
Thank you.
Jesper, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, as an economist, I can only agree on the need for carbon pricing and the market for these instruments. In a more broader term, I said there were differences. I mean, I'm pretty sure that solar energy is more efficient in Singapore, while up here in this windy north, wind energy is big. But apart from that, I think Singapore and Denmark shares the obvious realization that we are both small countries which are dependent on the rest of the world, and where our success depends on our ability to adapt, but also on more global issues. So we are very similar. We are nations which have a history of being extremely trade dependent, but also being very, if I may use a word which sometimes sort of give the creeps to people, but agile in the sense that we move very quickly and adapt to demand and relative prices because we don't have a lot of natural resources, either of us. So and I think that is one of the reasons why in many areas we have similar views on global issues of the need to protect our globe, and not just our country, but also the need to ensure an exchange of ideas and having technology drive us forward. So in that way, we are very similar. We are aware that we have something at stake, and in relation to sustainability, I mean that if anything is a global issue which will have an impact for both of us. I mean, and not least, and by the way, both of us are countries which live by the coast and not characterized by a lot of mountains, although you have more than us. So also in that area, we have a common interest. And as regulators, as I said earlier, we have to serve society in relation also to creating credibility around both fintech as well as sustainable solutions. So I had the pleasure of meeting with the Monetary Authority last year, and on a couple of occasions, and it is evident for me that we have a lot of common, we drive a lot of common issues, and including in this area.
Thanks, Jesper. I'm really compelled though to ask a little bit more provocative question here, because when all my speakers start agreeing, I know I'm not doing a very good job as a moderator. I don't think I'm going to get Singapore and Denmark to disagree on sustainability, but I wonder, as Damien said, this is a global issue. You are both of your countries are building kind of regional and global allegiances in order to advance it. What do you think, Jesper, are the difficult conversations here? Ones where you're not going to be agreeing with with the people across the table from maybe they wouldn't be moving as quickly as you would want.
No, I think that, I mean, one of the issues which was touched upon earlier is that everybody will benefit from others reducing CO2 emission, but everybody would also have an advantage in not doing it. So it's a classical game theoretical problem, and somehow getting everybody to move in the same direction in relation to these issues is really difficult, and we've seen it over and over again in relation to Paris agreements and other stuff. So I think that's one issue. I think another issue, but there I think short-term games will not happen, is that there can be a temptation to promote our own products without a sufficient discipline in terms of ensuring high standards. But there, I think the financial industry, and particularly the job of a financial supervisor, is a repetitive game, if I may stay in the game theory aspect. So I don't think that any of us, and I think both, again, if I may end with an agreement on this issue, both Singapore and Denmark is built on strong legal systems and strong legal certainty, and a very high level of trust. So I don't think you will see us being the ones who will promote products which are not genuine in terms of what they achieve. But that could be an issue, of course, across the globe. But I think the biggest problem is this sort of game problem in terms of how we get everybody to move. It's always much easier to ask others, but how we do that, I think that's the big issue out there.
Yeah. So in fact, I'll just add on as well. In fact, to agree with Jesper, and in fact, I'll just add on the part where if you look at the state of development, the state of economic development across the world is uneven to begin with. So when we talk about decarbonization efforts and how does it square together with the economic development of the economic development needs of different countries itself? And if you look at Asia, the equation is also even more complex in a sense. So certain parts of the world, while we talk about climate change being a global problem that all has to be vested in contributing towards mitigating that, we also have to square it together with the economic development needs of the respective countries itself. And if you look at Asia, I think we talk about it, Asia accounts for about 50% of the global emissions of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. And how do we support them in terms of their economic growth, yet in a way at which it mitigates the climate change issues that we are facing here? I think those would be the kind of complexities that we look at Denmark itself or Singapore. The issues are not really just about us, but the differences in the context of the parties that are involved, and how do we make sure that all these interests are also weighed in a way that supports them so that they can come on board together as we move in this journey itself to save all of us, in a sense, in this climate crisis itself. I think those are the kind of questions, the hard questions, the elephants in the rooms, in a sense, in terms of what we need to deal with. In a sense, there are no easy answers, but we do have to tackle them. Yeah.
Damien, I've got an audience question, which I think goes to your point about no easy answers and potential disparity. So one manifestation of what you're talking about is accounting standards and the difference of whether it's greenwashing or not. The ability from one jurisdiction to another to demonstrate that a green product is really a green product. How do we move that? How do we move forward at a global level on that issue?
Yeah. So in fact, Jesper also has his views, but from my perspective is that in fact one of the things that in Singapore itself we have been moving along is in the Green Finance Action Plan that we have set out, and a key area of which is about encouraging standards development, encouraging rating entities in terms of their services, in terms of verification, in terms of commitments that are made by different parties for the different products that they are saying that they in terms of what they're delivering. I think these are different kinds of services that we standards and services that we all have to develop. There isn't one single way to do it, but we all have to come together to make sure that there are certain ways in which we are able to have, in the same way as right now we are managing the credit standings of specific entities. We need the same way in which we probably don't have the same amount of time, but we probably need similar ways in which to bring about some standardized means of rating how entities, in terms of products themselves, in terms of their commitment levels, in terms of environmental areas, and also being able to monitor that they're delivering the kind of impact that they said they will be delivering. So I think it's a whole slew of standards, the services that's in there in the industry, and all the way as an end-to-end life cycle management is about the monitoring as well, to make sure that people are delivering, the products are delivering according to what they have committed to. Yeah, over.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I agree that this is really, as I also mentioned earlier, one of the big issues out there. And if we look, in fact, I've had the same idea on credit rating agencies. They have played a very prominent role in regulation in relation to risk weights, etc., etc. And it hasn't been an unqualified success story, and clearly there's a potential conflict in terms of the short versus the long term. Credit rating agencies are dependent on having long-term credibility, but at times we saw during the financial crisis that was sacrificed for short-term gains. And somehow we need to figure out how do we deal with that issue in relation to certification at different levels of sustainability. There's not just the problem of setting standards. I mean, that problem in itself is difficult enough. Do we set standards in terms of absolute levels or in terms of levels within certain industries? Do we set standards in relation to what sort of progress is being made or absolute levels? And of course, there are huge economic interests involved in how this is done. I mean, within Europe, the classical discussion has been nuclear power, where Germany sees it as pitch black and France sees it as shiny green. And somehow we need to deal with that. But on top of that, I think that technology and innovative thinkers could probably find a solution to how we deal with the short versus long term in terms of certifying these things and handle that issue. I mean, we can see it in relation to a lot of other technology solutions. I mean, when I this summer rented an Airbnb house in southern France, I could see the reviews from previous renters, and there was a review of me in terms of how I was as a renter, and that helps generate a market which otherwise should promote a market which otherwise should be filled with asymmetric information problems and create higher standards. And somehow we need to think in the line of something similar when we look at ratings in these areas.
Jesper, if I can follow up on this, one thing that is good about Airbnb, of course, is that everybody around the world can see sort of the information, the data on the product that you're about to go and rent in your example. But how do we square that circle when it comes to data sharing between jurisdictions that would help us build up that kind of certification transparency structure that you talk about? Is this an issue, and how do we go about solving it? Then I'll throw that to you, and then I'd like to hear Damien's view on it.
No, I mean, data sharing is a huge issue. And one of the issues which already creates discussions between, on the one side, the financial sector, and on the other side, big data, but also between Europe and the US. Europe has taken a much more restrictive approach to data sharing and data exchange than the US has. I think this is one of the biggest policy issues out there in terms of figuring out how do we create a level playing field across nations, but also across various industries. I think right now the financial industry is being hampered by having much more restrictive rules than big data. I won't weigh in on what I think are the right settings. I'm not sufficiently qualified for that. I haven't thought sufficiently about it, but I think this is really a key issue, and it also is a key issue in relation to sustainability and how we share that information, as you rightly point out. So I can only encourage people to raise that issue politically, and because I think it's absolutely crucial for setting the standards across the world.
Damien, over to you. I know that MAS has certainly been sharing that issue politically. So
So in fact, I tend to see it as that we got to cross over the part of how can we share this information, and it's not just about the sharing of the information, but to make sure that the information being shared has the appropriate levels of integrity. I think it is also about it's trusted information, the quality information, to know that you can trust this information that represents the impact that it has made, the changes, the commitments has been delivered. I think there are different things, there are different ways. In fact, when I look at that's when the technology space, I've been seeing that there are players that are starting to look into users of IoT, in a sense, applying IoT sensors closer to where the specific projects are, that allows that kind of measurements in a way in which you can trust of the information. And then we talk about the sharing of those information into the right parties who will be able to understand and be able to price, therefore, the project accordingly as well. So I think it is a multi-layer set of issues that needs to be dealt with. The sharing is one layer, but there's a slew of other areas that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, fair enough, Damien. We've got 4 minutes. I want to ask you 2 questions, so please be quick. The first one is, it's an issue that both of you somewhat alluded to, which is the changing role of the regulator and even regulatory architecture that we need to tackle sustainability decisively and in a long-term plan. So I want to start Jesper, I know you have certain views on how the regulatory architecture needs to absorb the climate challenges, financial services regulatory architecture, I should say.
Yeah, I think the big issue out there is whether we as supervisors are capable of doing the sort of quality assurance that a lot of people expect us to do at present. I could easily see that at some stage one says that this is simply too important to lead to regulators, financial regulators, and that we need some sort of other authority in there who are staffed with people with more capacity in this area. Alternatively, as we've also touched upon, I could see private sector solutions which would make it much easier for us. As a supervisor, we have a lot of capacity to assess governance issues. So we would be much better at assessing how a private sector solution in relation to putting quality characteristics on various sustainability solutions work than we would be in assessing the CO2 outlet, if you may say, put it that way.
Damien, over to you.
Yeah, fully agree with Jesper as well. So I think there are certain things that us as regulators, supervisors, and even developers of the industries, we have to recognize that there are certain levels of competencies and capabilities that we are capable of. I think the parts of holding institutions in terms of their respective constituents responsible and accountable, I think these are the things that we need to make sure that we do it. And even, for example, regulators looking at stress testing with regards to implications of climate change in terms of portfolio, what it means in a sense for the respective financial institutions. I think these are things that are things that we will have to pick up. But I suspect that we will rely a lot on the how the industry picks up on all these different angles as well, in a sense. So it's a learning for both sides of the private sector as well as the regulators. Over.
Okay, thank you both. I think kind of my main takeaway from what you've said is that you've created a long list of topics for you to think about in the future, and then the kind of to take it on a positive note is because that you are thinking. I mean, you're both big minds on your own right, but also a lot of intellect behind you in your organizations, and you're thinking along the same lines. So that's kind of my most positive spin. I want to close off on one question, which is if you were to leave your public servant hats on the side and start a company that solves one UN SDG or moves closer to one UN Sustainable Development Goal, what would that company do? What problem would it solve? I start with you, Damien.
Okay, sure. So maybe I'll just in a quick line in the sense that I always think that the part about poverty is something that we all can deal with, and it's about creating the right economic opportunities through financial services itself, targeted financial services, and that is the kind of thing that if I were in the public sector, I would probably be thinking about. I think that is one very purposeful thing that we should be able to do, and we could think about ways in which financial services could be targeted and helping to eradicate poverty.
Thanks, Damien. Jesper, famous last words.
Yeah, also there we agree. I actually have a friend, a former staff member, who has been trying to set up a social investment fund with investments in Africa over the last couple of years. And that's a very admirable, but also a very difficult task. Somehow, I think if we could, as economists, figure out a way in which to integrate the positive externalities from such initiatives into something which would fit with either government expenditures or private sector money, I think that would be brilliant.
Okay, well, I see future collaborations in both of your future. I see collaborations in your futures, I'd say, based on your answers. Thank you both very much. I think it's time for me to hand over back to someone from Copenhagen Fintech,
Yes.
who's going to take the microphone from me. Okay, thank you for your time. It's a really interesting conversation.
Thanks a lot for your.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to hear your answers. We are delighted to have had such an interesting discussion. So thank you.